Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Insights at DDLynn Designs, a unique twist in the ancient art of wire. I'm so excited to share with all of you today how to make these empowerment copper washer. I call them empowerment, talisman, symbolic, unisex copper washer pendant necklace design. So I'm really excited to share with you. I got some feedback and comments if I would teach this. I won't be teaching my advanced. This is more intermediate, but just a few quick things before we get started. If you love my channel, please hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to hit the bell. And any comments, I will promise you I'll get back to you. Also, a little disclaimer, I got some more feedback about if I could please show pictures of my designs on my videos, meaning could I edit them? And here's the problem. I live in a very rural area. Our Wi-Fi is extremely slow, and it would cost me a couple $1,000s to update my computer to get sophisticated software. So obviously I'm not going to do that. And so for people that were asking, could you please show pictures or edit your videos? Can't do that right now. It would cost me a lot of money. It takes me 3 days to upload one video to YouTube. So I appreciate your patience, but you know, all of the wonderful wire artists out there that are giving away their designs for free takes a lot of time and effort. So I really hope that you appreciate it. Any tips or donations would be greatly appreciated. I'm trying to climb the YouTube social media ladder, whatever you call all of that, and get monetized. So anyways, just wanted to throw all that out there. Let's get started. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to choose 2 washer sizes. I get my washers on Amazon. You can buy them anywhere. I believe they have them at Harbor Freight too. And today I'm going to be using this size for my larger washer, which is this one right here, the 18 by 24 by 1.5. And I'm going to be using, I believe, this size. Yeah. The 12 by 18 by 10 right there. And what I've done is I've hammered my washers. You don't have to. You'll notice that when you take your washer out, and it's kind of hard to see at first, there's one side that's super flat. Okay, and the other side is a little bit more domed. So if you are going to hammer them, I would recommend that you look for that little bit more of a dome size. So before we get started, I wanted to talk about materials. I'm using an 8mm Soldalite semi-precious gemstone. And you need to determine your stone size when you're looking at the smaller washer, because you need gap space in order to run your square wires through, like in this one, because we're going to be connecting it all together through that gap space. So that's something that you want to keep in mind when you're choosing your beads based on the size of your washer. My biggest washer is just a little bit over 1 inch. And because of this particular design element, I have cut 2 pieces of 20 gauge square dead soft wire, and it's pure copper solid wire, and they are 7 inches long. And I'll also be using, let me grab that, be right back. Dropped it on the floor. Now I got to scoot my chair in. I'll also be using 24 gauge, and I cut myself 7 inches of weaving wire. And the reason why we're going to be using 24 gauge is the edge of the copper washer is very sharp. So 28 gauge would likely snap. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to set my stone, and we're going to be working towards the top of the stone. But don't worry, find the center of your wire. Okay, and don't worry if it slides around, because we're going to be correcting that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to secure this bead, and I'm going to wrap my wire. So this is my front where it's hammered, and I'm going to wrap my wire around the casing of this copper washer. Now, round wire, and especially on this flat edge of the washer, is going to tend to bow or buckle. Can you see that little gap there? So you want to make sure that you flatten it down. So I'm going to roll and push towards the inside. So it's nice and snug and flat, and I'm going to bring it around and again through. So we're going to end up with 3 wraps on each side. And again, you're going to see that gap. So I'm just going to push it. I'm going to come around the back. And I'm going to roll it as I'm flattening it. And you might want to use flat nose or something with a good wide jaw when you're doing this. Keep your wires snug and close together. And then I'm just going to pull that over the side like that. And flatten it. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, and I want to make sure my bead is close to the top. Because as I mentioned, we need that gap space. It seems to be wanting to go in this direction, so we'll go in that direction. Now don't worry about the gap space in between this bead. I'm going to teach you a really cool technique on how to fill that gap space with your wire. So I'm going to do the same thing. Just make sure I'm going in the same direction. So I'm working around the back, bringing my wire through. Now I want this really snug in here, and I've got too much of a gap in this wire. So I'm going to loosen my wire up, and I'm going to come in with my chain nose. And I'm simply going to just pull that away, meaning towards the outside of the copper washer frame, because I really want to tighten it up in there. And I'm going to start sliding this up a little bit more towards the top. Just making my adjustments as I'm going. I'm using that slack to really pull that bead in there tight. There we go. Really felt that snug down. Sliding it up. Okay, so now we have 3 wraps on each side. And you can see how your gemstone is going to be sliding back and forth. So we're going to fix that. So now we're going to come around the back, and I'm actually going to train my wire. So what I mean by that is I'm going to set it up to position it. So I'm flattening it against the back, and then I'm going to kind of crimp it down in there. Then I'm going to get my chain nose, and I'm going to hold this side down firmly, and I'm going to feed it through. If I can hold it steady. And I'm just feeding it through. I'm going to turn around to the front, and we're going to continue to wrap it around this wire that the bead is sliding on. Kind of tucking it in there a little bit. So I'm just going to keep feeding that through. It creates just a really cool look, I think. This is something I came up with on my own. I was just playing with wire and thinking about different ways to actually cross your wires over, but create a unique design element at the same time. Now you want to watch as it's creating gaps to push that wire down. And it's going to feed it through even more. So I'm going to slide these up closer towards the frame. And it's going to really start to fill in that gap space. Just rocking it. So here's my front. And I'm just pulling that wire through. Isn't that cool? And we're just filling in that gap space. So we're going to do the same thing, going around the back, give our wire a little training, flatten it down, crimp it in. Then I'm going to hold this, bring my wire through. I'm not really left-handed, but I tell you, I've become more ambidextrous, I think that's how you say it, in this art, this beautiful ancient art of wire. If you didn't know, it dates back before the Phoenicians, over 5,000 years ago. And so I'm going to wrap this 3 times on this side. Just creates a really cool look. Bringing it closer to the frame. Now this will happen, and it's really good this happen. It has a tendency to want to lift up on the back. So all we're going to do is just push that down. Push them together, and I'm going to hold my wires and really give this a good rock. Need to feed it through a little bit more. There we go. So now it's sticking up on that side, which is the front. So I'm just going to pull it through. And I'm just going to feed that wire through a little bit more. As I rock it, tighten it up around that core wire there. I'm having a heck of a time. Oh, that was funny. Feeding it through. So there's our third. Or was that my second? That was my second. I got to go through one more time. And if you don't have enough space, depending on the bead size you're using, then just do 2 wraps. I want to fill that space up. I don't want that bead really moving. I'm just going to tighten her up in there a little bit. So now my wire on both sides, so this is my top, okay? And I'm going to yank those up a little bit. I don't know about you guys, but this is murder on our nails. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap it through again, okay? So I'm going to take my wires through, and I'm going to do 2 wraps. Flatten it on the back and roll it in. And the same thing over here. I got a nasty little bend in the tip of this wire, so I'm just going to straighten it out so I can feed it through. Rock it. And I'm just going to flatten it and roll it. I'm really snugging it up against there. And feed it through one more time. I'm going to get these pliers to flatten it more. They're wider jaw. Depending on what we're doing, your tools really make a difference. So a very narrowed tip plier doesn't give you as much, trying to find the word, stability. and it could ding into your wire a little bit more. So that's our back. Now we're on the front. So what we're going to do is we're going to secure this wire again. It's just really cool. It's going to be, like I said, a little bit different than this one because that's me. I hate doing the same thing twice. It's absolutely boring to me. So I always like a challenge, and I'm always seeing new things. So I'm feeding it through like we did before, and it's going to bow up in the back. That's normal. So I'm just going to straighten that out. Gonna have to keep feeding her through. We've got less working room here, so it tends to want to buckle more. So I'm gonna get these pliers so that I can hold them flat. Now I'll have more leverage to pull my wire through. There we go. I felt it snap right in. So we're just securing it, and then we're going to tuck it in. Make sure they're looking hunky-dory in the front. Just making my corrections as I go. And I snapped that off because it broke clean right on the inside of this washer. Perfect, and that's exactly where I wanted it to. So I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to feed this wire through, and he's a little shorty. Just pushing it through with my finger. Perfect. And I'm just going to wiggle, jiggle, go in a circle. Hopefully snap this one clean too, which I didn't, so I'm going to have to cut it. There we go. And just secure it. So here is what we have. Isn't that cool? Need to tuck that in and secure it a little bit better. I need a finer tipped. Tools are everything. So there we go. So now we're going to start putting it all together. This is what you should have. So we're going to be turning it this way. This is now going to be our bottom because we need that gap space to bring in our wires. We're going to come through this gap space right here. So now I'm going to get my 2 pieces of 20 gauge square wire, and I'm going to find center. And I know that these are 7 inches, so that would be 3.5. And I'm going to come about 1/4 inch to the left of center. And I'm going to be using 28 gauge weaving wire. And I'm going to do, what kind of weave do I want to do? I think I'm going to do like a 2-3. I'm thinking about it right now. Let me find my 3.5 mark. Okay. We're going to do about 3/4 of an inch. You can do any weaving pattern that you like. I'm going to make 5 coils. and push those together. So I've completed 5 full rotations. So now I'm going to come up, over, in between the two, come all the way around the back, and back over wire 1 and in between. I'm going to do that again. Up, over, so I'm going over 2 wires, in between 2 wires, all the way around the back and over my wire 1, 1 full rotation, and 1 more time, and then we're going to do 5 coils. So over both wires, in between both wires, all the way around the back, and complete rotation around your base wire, your wire number 1. So I'm going to do this one more time, up to 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to do 5 coils. Just pushing them together. And then up, over, in between, and I'm going to do that 3 times. So over 2, in between 2, all the way around the back and over wire 1. That's 2 repeats. Over 2, in between 2, all the way around the back. That's 3 repeats. So basically we're doing 3 repeats of this design with 5 coils in between. So I'll be right back. 3/4 of an inch, okay? So I'm back, and I decided to do it a little bit longer, so I ended up doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 repeats. I'm going to cut off my wire off the spool, and I'm going to leave about 6 to 7 inches because you never know. This is a very freestyle design, even though I've done a lot of different kind of Talisman, Symbolic, copper washer, pendant designs. You never know when you're going to need your excess wire. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create the bail. So all I'm going to do is just fold these towards each other like in a U shape. Then I'm going to, like when we're making a bail for a cabochon, I'm going to bring them together, and then I'm going to push these legs down and in with my thumb. And I'm supporting my bail so that I can squeeze them together. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to swing these legs out in the back just a little bit, and I'm going to start pushing this together. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the back and squeeze them in. So this is going to be our bail. So I did this just a little over 3/4 of an inch, but under an inch. This was a little over an inch, this one. So it's a really big bail. I decided I wanted a smaller bail on this one. Now 20 gauge wire is really soft. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to flatten out and be careful not to compromise my weave, because the wires tend to want to roll, especially when we're shaping, weaving. And I'm just flattening out, kind of rolling that back. Want some nice symmetry to that. And we're going to be doing this a lot as we're going. So this is going to be my front. And if you noticed, I didn't coil off 5 coils on this one because I'm going to be wrapping this wire around this bail. So the first thing I'm going to do is, if you haven't seen this before, I'm going to snap my wire. And you just make a little circle, a little jiggle, and it snaps clean off in between those 2 wires. Just going to correct this a little bit more. Okay, so let's get started. So now what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that what used to be the top is now our bottom. And I'm going to feed, just want to see where I want to set myself up. I'm going to feed this, the two front wires. So this is my, no, that's my back. Those are where my coils were. Two front wires through here, and pick up my bigger washer. And I just kind of want to get an idea right now of how I want to set myself up and where I want to start making my bend and where I want to weave my bail together. It's going to be wonky and very fiddly, so this is really, if I haven't mentioned it already, more of an intermediate tutorial. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap my bail together. I'm just swinging my legs out so I have room to pinch it together. And I'm just going to pinch it together like that. And I need to squeeze this in a little bit more. So I'm grabbing both the wires and squeezing them in. There we go. Now I'm going to take this wire that I have and I'm going to start wrapping it around my bail. And it's just going to give it another unique design element. And be careful not to cross over. You'll feel it when you do. Kind of catches. Okay, I'm going to take a look at that. And I like that a lot. Now, if you haven't watched my tutorial, I have a tutorial called How to Hide Your Wire. And instead of having to coil it off on a leg, which you can, that's absolutely fine, I'm going to feed my wire through these wires. And I'm going to create like a upside down question mark. And I'm coming through the middle. And I'm feeding that wire through. And I'm going to grab that wire and slowly start to pull it through. See if you can see it better like that. You want to keep a really healthy loop because you don't want this to kink up. Now I'm going to hold my wires very firmly and it's wanting to kink up a little bit. And then I'm just going to keep pulling until I feel it snap into place. And I just hid my wire. I don't have to tie it off on a leg. And then I'm just going to come in and trim it. Super duper short. And if you guys haven't seen these flush cutters, if you're new to my channel, these are absolutely awesome. I'm going to see if I can snap this wire. Much better than cutting it. So there we have it. So there's our bail. This is my front. So now I'm going to separate my wires a little bit. And now we're going to start wrapping. And I'm going to bring these wires, and this is the quite fiddly part, through. And I need to spread them out even more. So you want to really get them spread out on top. And things will be a little wonky at first, but that's okay. We're going to make all the corrections that we need. Okay. Just spreading my wires out so I have some more working room. Now this washer here. This one's going to ride on top of that. So what we're going to do is find our center, and I'm going to squeeze these wires. This is what I mean by the fiddly part, against the frame. Watch that they don't cross over like mine did, because we're basically setting ourselves up. Very fiddly. I'm going to turn this over and start working on the back. So these are my back wires. I'm going to lift them up a little bit. So I can, there we go. Now I'm getting more control. It's very fiddly. No, I've probably said that 10 times, right? Let me take this out for a minute. I want to spread these out. So what I'm just doing is I'm making it easier for myself. Then these wires in the back, and we'll find our center here in just a minute. We're going to spread these out to the side. So these are our front wires. These are our back wires. Everything's going to be a little wonky at first. Okay. So now I'm going to spread these out even more to the side, and then I'll be turning it to the front to make sure that I'm center. I'm still working on my back. This is why I said it was intermediate. So this is our front right now. And as I mentioned, this washer is going to ride up, okay? It's intended to do that based on the design. Just got to watch and keep everything center. Pull that down a little bit. Come up a little bit higher here. You really have to watch when you're doing this. I got a couple of requests to teach this, so I'm bringing it up higher. And now I'm going to start, seeing that I look pretty center, I'm going to start tucking these wires in. So I'm just creating a curve in them and feeding them through, but I'm not going to tighten them up. Just feeding it through. You want to, if you're a beginner, you always want to straighten out that back wire and not let it continue to coil. And I'm going to stop there. So you can see that I have this big gap until I line up this side. Like I said, it's fiddly. Feeding that through. Now we're going to start to center some stuff up here. Let's pull that wire that way. Your focus is the middle of your bead between the middle of your bale wires here. I'm just doing a little bit at a time so that I can keep my symmetry. Don't worry about those back wires. It's going to make everything look wonky. You want to focus on your washers and how they're lining up underneath your bale. So now I'm going to push this wire down against the washers. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. I need my wider jaw pliers. You have so much more support when you're doing this if you use a wider jaw plier. I'm just watching my symmetry here. Want to make sure my wires are evenly coming out. Start pushing that down. I'm going to anchor off that wire and flatten it down in there even more. Rocking. And we're going to be making a lot of adjustments. So I'm coming around the back now, and I'm just going to flatten that in there more. Flatten this one in there more. And bring this over on each side. It's turning out pretty cool, isn't it? So I can see that I'm over to the right a little bit, so how I'm going to correct that is I'm going to start pulling this side in a little bit more. And I need a more narrow tip wire, plier. Let's take a look. Lots of adjusting. That's much better. This is kind of sliding up, so it's deceiving. It's making you think it's off center when it's really not. I can adjust those more once I secure this completely. Bring this side down. Just a lot of adjustments. Okay, so now I'm going to straighten out my wires because they got a little wonky, and this really makes your work and defines it so much better than working with twisted wires. So I'm just using my nylon jaw pliers to create a really clean, so that makes it easier for me to work with that wire. So now I'm going to bring this over like this. So I'm crossing it over the bead. And then right where the bead is, just above it, I'm going to make a curve. And I'm just going to curve this wire out. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to cross it over. And I'm going to make a curve above the bead all the way to the outside. So here's what we're looking at. Isn't this the coolest? And I'm going to change it up from this a little bit. As I mentioned, I don't like to do the same thing twice. So it's a very similar design element, but a little bit different. So I'm going to flatten these out right here. And I may do some more wrapping around this bale. I might do some half round wire. I don't know. I work very impromptu, but I do want to tighten this up a little bit. Isn't that cool? It's just the sky's the limit. So now I just want to make sure I've got symmetry going here. These wires inside could be moved down a little bit, because I'm definitely center here. It's just the wires, when we're looking at them, often can be very deceiving. So now I'm just going to spin this up just a little bit. You always want to look in opposite directions, meaning up, down, front, back. And I'm going to keep pushing those over my frame. I'm going to turn it around to the front here. I can see this one's a little lower. So all I'm going to do is swing it in a little bit so that I can correct that. So basically we're going to be wrapping it and tucking it around the frame. So I want to swing this one up a little bit. Just constantly adjusting. Little movements in this ancient art. So now I'm going to bring these around the back and I'm going to hold my front very firmly. And I'm just going to bring it over. And I'm going to tuck this wire through that gap right there. Holding very firmly. I'm going to bring it around. I'm not going to do anything else yet until I secure this other side. So holding very firmly. Change the direction of this. And tuck that wire through that gap. Turn around. Make sure everybody's happy and lining up. Holding it very firmly and bringing it over. Now let's line them up. Don't worry about the back. We're going to be fixing that here shortly. Just so cool. I love this idea. I don't know how I come up with anything, to be honest with you. I just do. I just start working on something and I go with the flow. I just go where it takes me. And honestly, I never know where it's going to take me. Just sliding those wires down and these up over here. I'm trying to get in there.
Hello, can I help you, please? This is the board home.
Oh, that's much better. I'm super picky. I think everybody is in this art, right? Much better. Now we're going to secure these on the back of our piece. Want to make sure they're nice and tight. Anchor off your wire, the wire that you're tucking. Always anchor off of that. It'll give you a lot more support. Then I'm just going to roll this back and roll this back. Squish them up. That's our back. That's our front. Cool. Flatten this down a little bit. So, I'm liking it. It's very cool. Just don't like that wire moving like that. So now I'm going to go ahead. I know this is too long. can see that there. So I'm going to cut that a little bit. Not a lot, just enough to tuck her in. Then I'm going to get my very petite nose, and sorry about my arm. Tweezer nose, I think they call these. And I'm going to roll, I'm going to set myself up and roll that edge in so I can tuck it. Do you see how I'm just grabbing the very tip and just rolling it? Then I'll get my bent nose and I'll come off and anchor off that, and I'm going to roll in as I'm pushing it in to the inside of that frame. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. I know that that's too long, but you know, at this time, I think I'll just start my roll since I have excess wire, and then I'll trim it. And I just saw, this is what I mean as we're going along, just a little bit of a gap here. You want this nice and firm because this is going to secure your pendant. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm anchoring off that wire and I'm rolling my wrist towards me to tuck it in. And there is our front. Isn't that the coolest? Love it. Similar, but different, right? That one shifted a little bit. And you can always glue if you're worried about your wires sliding. Some artists are like, oh, you can't use glue. You can use anything you want. It is your design. It is your vision. And I stand very strong on that. I think you use whatever you want. I've intermingled polymer clay with some of my designs, and it's just so cool. So you do whatever you want. There's no wrong or right. This is an art, and that's why we call it an art, because it's unique, and each person has their own idea and vision. Okay, now we're going to do the back. So on this one, I thought about after I finished doing it, I could have weaved in between there. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to lift my wires up because I want to straighten them, and I want them super clean, and I'm going to separate them out. And I'm going to get all of this mess out of my way. And I'm going to get my nylon jaw pliers, and I'm really going to straighten up these wires because I want them nice and clean and neat. Holding my bail very firmly. So I know that I want this frame wire. So here's my legs coming off my bail. I want it to come on the side of the stone. I don't want it to come over my stone, okay? So this is where we're going to start just tweaking, seeing how everything's going on. Turn it around to the front. And this is rolled a little bit here. So I'm going to get, these are my favorite to do this kind of thing with because they've got a very smooth, soft edge. They're not really sharp. And I'm just going to kind of, without compromising my weave, because that's going to square my frame up. And I can see over here, 20 gauge is very soft. I would normally do this with 18, but makes it easier for the sake of the tutorial. And I'm also thinking as I'm doing this, because I'm always thinking, flatten that down right there. There we go. Maybe doing something here again, I don't know. Let's scoop that in on the neck. I'll leave it. Just cleaning it up. Really want to scoop that in on the neck right there. So I'm thinking this is going to be different. Now we could coil these legs with weaving wire, which would give it another design element, or just leave them like that and start wrapping them. And I think that's what I'm going to do. Yeah. half round wire would look really cool on the legs as well too. So I'm just looking at all my different directions, and I'm going to start feeding this wire. Just shaping myself, giving myself a head start. You start pre-shaping your wire in the direction that you want to go. It makes it much easier to control it and keep it where you want it. Slowly, little movements. I am not going to secure it completely. Straighten that leg out. And just a gentle rock, but not totally secure. And I'm coming in the inside of the gap. So not on the outside, on the inside. I'm just pre-shaping my wire, so I set myself up to make my life a lot easier. Get in a better working position. I'm holding the body very firmly. Straighten that out. It's always better as you're feeding your wire through, it's going to naturally keep coiling. You're always better to straighten that leg out. And now I'm going to give her a little rock. Now I'm going to turn it around. See where we're going with all of this. And start making some corrections. Meaning symmetry, how I want my alignment. I think I want these a little bit closer together. Loving this, just loving it. And it's going to look really cool, oxidized. So I'm going to get my wider jaw pliers and push that against my frame. And let's see how this side is lining up. You don't want to lock yourself in entirely yet until you know where you want to set everything, meaning your wires, where you want them to set, making sure you have symmetry. So it's a constant visual, going back and forth and back and forth. Moving those up. And you know what, you guys, if I repeat myself a lot, I can't remember half the time what I'm saying. I don't script this. I know that some of the more technical wire artists that do tutorials and have some really cool, sophisticated software script everything. And I don't. I am right off the seat of my pants, friends. So, forgive me if some things are just a little repetitive. Now, some things I mean to be repetitive with, repeating wire gauges and things like that. So I'm just constantly shifting and looking. And I'm going to continue with this wrap. And I'm going to kind of just set myself up. Makes it easier to feed your wire through. If you start the wire and shape it in the direction that you want to go, and there's that coil wanting to come up. Coming around the back, I'm just going to give her a snug. I want her nice and tight. I want everything super secure. And same thing here, making a little curve. Feed her through. Straighten that wire out because you need it straight in order to do your little tugs and snugs, and you need that anchor. And I actually think I'm going to continue to use this wire for one more wrap. I think it's just going to be, almost reminds me, I'd like everybody's feedback of what it looks like to you. A combination of a star, combination of a little bit of a pentagram up here, and then a seaworthy kind of look, ship's wheels, sort of. I'm getting all sorts of visuals right now. So I'd love everybody's comment on what they think. I'm just going to feed that wire through again. Pushing it down. I really like using a wider jaw when I'm using. And this one's a little bit shorter, so I can naturally feed it. Always anchoring off my wire and rolling in the direction that I want that wire to go. Now I'm going to flatten them down a little bit more. This is why you want a wider jaw, softer edge, because you don't want to cut into your wire either. That's very cool. I love it. I can't wait to see this oxidized. It's going to be really cool. And I may still do something with this frame later. I just had a vision of doing a figure 8 weave in and out of that. That is super duper coolio. So now we're just going to cut our wires and seal them off. I'm pulling these really tight. And you cut them wherever you want. I'm going to cut them further back, and then I'm going to taper them down into the copper washer frame. So I've got these little blunt ends there, and I want them really smoothed down. So I'm just going to cut that edge on an angle, and I'll probably hit these with my drill. And then I'm going to get my chain nose, and I'm going to really squeeze those, and I'm tapering off that edge. It's kind of like causing the wire to roll. Do you see the difference? And melt. So it's kind of curving down now and melting, and I don't feel anything. Because the last thing you want is knicker news. So I'm just very lightly. Did I already take the edge off on that one? I did, didn't I? I forgot. And I'm going to roll and push on that tip. On the tip of that wire, I am rolling off of it and tapering down. So I'm kind of like smushing it into it to where you can't feel anything. And it's just such a clean finish. You can take a file or a drill if there's any Sharpies. So that's our back. And this is our front. And there we have it, ladies and gents. Our really cool, I call these Empowerment Talisman Warrior. This is like a warrior collection design. But as you can see, they're similar, but they're different. The bail is different. The neck is different. The angle of the wires are different. How I weave this one in comparison to this one. This one really gives me like a, what do you call that? Like a seaworthy, I know there's a name for it, but I can't think of it. Anyways, I really hope you enjoyed that, everybody. Please give me your feedback and comments and let me know what you think and what you saw and what your vision is. And I'd love to see your finished product. I'll be posting these when they're done and oxidized. And again, thank you so much for being a part of this wonderful, magical ancient art of wire community. I wish for all of you all that you wish for yourselves, and have a magical, wonderful wire wrap day. Bye for now.